Okay, good morning, Dad. Today is Wednesday, November 13th, and I think we got to start by talking about all these Trump appointments.
Yeah.
So maybe we can start with this, though. Can you tell us what appointments really matter? Which ones should we really be looking for?
Well, certainly the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, these are very high level positions. These people, we've seen Tony Blinken, for example, basically running U.S. foreign policy. Now, that's of course because he has, a brain dead president above him, but no, it's never possible for the president to manage every affair. He always has to delegate authority. So these people will have a tremendous impact on our foreign policy and our, military policy as well.
Okay, yeah. For me, always the big one that I was thinking of is Secretary of State. I mean, that's
Yeah.
because we hear Anthony Blinken. So would you say
Right.
that really is the most important position we should be looking for?
Yeah, historically it has been very important. Yeah, it's true that actually you tend to remember who the Secretary of State was more often than who the Secretary of Defense was. Now, that's obviously quite important, but that's probably the single most important appointment.
Okay, so we'll start there. I mean, at the time of recording this, these appointments are coming out pretty quickly recently, so maybe by the time we listen to this, we'll know. But it sounds almost like the media has already said that it's Marco Rubio, that this
Yeah.
is kind of been decided almost. The way that the
Yeah.
mainstream media is talking about it, do you believe that it is going to be
I
Marco
think
Rubio?
it is. There's nobody saying anything else. It's, in fact, I got some of the news stories confirmed that it's Marco Rubio. So it's much more than a rumor. It is Marco Rubio. I think we can say
But why
99%.
hasn't Trump then confirmed it himself? I mean,
I don't know.
because
I don't know.
Well, they did the same thing with Mike Pompeo, though, right? Well,
That was different. It was just rumors, reports, people are saying, but there wasn't ever confirmed it's, a Mike Pompeo.
Right, but it was, I was watching the news a couple nights ago, and they were talking about it, and most people were saying, like, yeah, it sounded we're putting most of their money on Mike Pompeo.
Right. No,
And then
I think this is real. That was always just rumor.
how do you know it's real? Because I just feel like I can't trust mainstream media anymore.
Okay, well,
I just don't know. And like,
yeah.
do they just say things and try to will it into
Well,
existence?
yeah, obviously they make up a lot of stuff. I think less so about domestic politics than they do about foreign politics, because with, kind of like the North Koreans, that's just stuff being fed to them directly by Ukrainian propagandists. They in general do a better job of verifying and, in general, I know we get a lot of false domestic news as well, but I'm just more willing to trust it. I'm sure that it's Marco Rubio.
Okay.
I'm willing to put down a whole Bitcoin.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Well, I'm not. So,
Okay.
okay. So, what should we expect with a Marco Rubio, Secretary of State?
Marco Rubio, he's been around for a long time, and he's an establishment Republican. I mean, I think that's just the way to describe him. He never surprises you with anything. I mean, he just reflects this establishment consensus. He's
Well,
always been a neocon. Not particularly crazy unhinged, but he's always been a solid neocon.
All right, I was going to ask, what does an establishment Republican mean? Because it used to be kind of the neocons were the establishment. Is that still what you consider establishment Republican?
I think you have to say that they are. I mean, there is this growing MAGA movement, which Trump very imperfectly leads, but it's still a minority. I mean, like, you think about it,
You mean the
well, look
America
at like what
First
happened
movement?
on the vote on Ukraine aid. Right. When it came down to it, it was, yeah, actually there were a certain number. It was like, like 2/3, or maybe it was about half the Republicans actually voted for it and the other half didn't. So there are dissidents, but Marco Rubio was never part of that.
Okay, and then for
He said,
Secretary,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say for Secretary of Defense, they announced Pete Hegseth, which I guess is another kind of establishment type character. Establishment
Yeah, well, I think
Republican.
he's even worse. I mean, he's like a clone of Lindsey Graham. I mean, he's really unhinged. I've been going back over some of his old speeches, and he's horrible.
Okay, well then just give me your assessment of what so far of what your of the Trump cabinets. It sounds pretty bad, right? When it
It's
comes to foreign
awful. I
policy.
mean, really, it's just my cynicism, I think, has been fully justified. I mean, it really couldn't be worse. I mean, he's picked nothing but swamp monsters. And there's no sign of. Sometimes you can argue about this person maybe is, I don't think you can make that argument about any of them. They're all terrible. They're all terrible. They're either, it may be even worse than what Kamala Harris would have picked.
Really, that
Yeah,
bad, huh?
that bad. Yeah.
Okay, well, do you think this is really what that $100 million that Adelson donated to
Oh,
him
I'm sure
bought?
it
Is
had a
it
big effect. But look, it was the same thing the first time around. I know everybody believed it was going to be different this time, but I didn't. The first time around, he just picked the same kind of people. When at foreign policy, he just disappointed entirely. On domestic policy, he's already done some things. He's already kept some promises, and I think we can see some real change in certain domestic policies. And that was true the first term as well. I mean, I remember education policy really changed, and I remember that immigration policy really changed. He really did. He didn't build the wall, but he did actually keep a fair number of promises on domestic issues, and I think that's what we're going to see again this time. But he did not keep any of his promises on foreign policy, not in 2016, and clearly he's not doing it this time either.
Trump always kind of bragged about that there were no new wars that were started under his presidency.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that people, one of the few appealing things that, for me about Trump was that fact. I mean, the wars didn't all end under him, but
Yeah, but that may have been more a matter
desire.
of. Yeah, I think it's true, like what we said about him. He's not a natural warmonger. He doesn't actually like wars, but he seems to, like he says, I listen to my generals, which is a mistake. And in that first term, yeah, he didn't start any wars, but I think that was really more a matter of chance than anything, of timing. He continued wars like the awful war in Yemen. That was really genocidal, continued to support the Saudi Arabians there. And he actually, laid the groundwork for the war in Ukraine. I mean, his administration imposed a lot of sanctions on Russia. Russian-U.S. relations deteriorated markedly during his first term. And he started flooding Ukraine with weapons. That was something that Obama did not do. He refused to do, but that's something Trump did. I don't think, he really didn't show any restraint. I think it was just a matter of timing that no new war started under him during those 4 years.
Okay, so you think this end the war type of sentiment that was behind some of the MAGA movement and behind Trump is just. It was just smoke and mirrors for.
Well,
that.
Okay. I don't think I think he actually, when he says these things, he means it. But he's just he's very inconsistent and incoherent. All of us that are like in the foreign policy dissident community, when he says something that speaks to us, that reflects our hopes and desires. We latch onto it and remember it. Oh yeah, remember Trump said this. What we tend to forget is that like 5 minutes later he said the opposite thing, or the next day he said the opposite thing, and he just does that all the time. So I think that's part of the problem. It's just that he's just very inconsistent. And then when he gets into office, the thing is they're at the higher levels. The people that are generally considered qualified to staff, Secretary of State, there just aren't any foreign policy dissidents. It's the blob. And so he needs to be somebody who's just very, intellectually courageous, morally courageous, and have just a real clear view of what he needs to do, and work hard to put together some kind of team. But he's not that person. So he says, like, I think, like, if, his preferences probably are for a more, a less militaristic, a less confrontational kind of foreign policy. Those are his natural instincts, but they're just instincts. And he's easily played when everybody around him, everyone in the room is oriented in the other direction. The game's over. They get their way.
So he's just filling his administration with the blob, with the deep state.
Yeah.
There was some hope for a deep, there's some hope for a deep state candidate. So, for an anti-deep state candidate, that's kind of what I think a lot of people were hoping for. But it looks like already,
right? Well, I never really hoped. I only had the smallest hope. We'll put it that way.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll see what happens with the rest of these positions. Yeah. But
well, another thing I just wanted to point out, one reason that a lot of people were hopeful is that they were listening too much to his opponents, European leaders and whatever, they're going, if Trump's elected, the war is going to end in Ukraine. He's going to pull the rug out from under him. NATO is going to disintegrate. And you hear this just wild talk and you think, wow, great. My vote's for Trump. But you forget these people are just unhinged. They're just crazy. These are the same people who say that he's an existential threat to democracy, which he isn't. They're just a bunch of lunatics in an insane asylum. And, I wish what they were saying was true, but it's just not. They've made him out into some sort of boogeyman, that is going to upend all their plans. But unfortunately, that's not who he is.
Is your picture clear, Dad? It's really fuzzy.
No, it's actually very fuzzy, and I don't know why it is.
Okay, I think, could you turn the camera off and back on? You can click on the button down there.
Okay. Yeah, it's a lot better now.
Right. Yeah, much better. So, it seems like Trump is the reason he's filling up his cabinet with the blob, with the deep state. Is it just because of campaign donations? Is that really what's deciding things? Like,
I might in a few cases. There are some obvious, like he chose this ultra-Zionist to be the ambassador to the United Nations. And I think that may have been a Miriam Alderson pick, because of the $100 million that she gave. But it doesn't explain the other ones, for example, Secretary of State or even Secretary of Defense. I mean, they're hawkish on Israel, but they always were. And, all of them are, and they're just hawkish all around.
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
You could find somebody, if that was the case, he could, because these people obviously do exist, especially in the Republican Party, people who are very hawkish on Israel, ultra-Zionists, but who actually have a very a realistic appreciation of the situation in Ukraine. Those people do exist. But he hasn't chosen those kind of people.
Right. Well, it sounds like, I know people like Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth were very anti-Russia, pro-Ukraine war, but it sounds like they've been changing their tune recently as part of an agreement with kind of joining the Trump administration. That's the view that I've been getting. And it sounds like a lot of what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of China hawks that are moving into this administration as well. That maybe we might see sort of a lessening of the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, but an increased attention towards the Pacific theater to confront China, which is just insane.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you can really get much worse with what's going on in the Middle East, but clearly no change of course there. And it sounds like that the Zionists are celebrating on Twitter, on X, with these appointments. And I think that's kind of that's a clear indication that these are not great picks. Yeah. Because if you see,
I think I just saw
Zionists celebrating.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro said that, fantastic picks all around. And you say, oh no. Yeah, if Ben Shapiro's happy, then it's time to grieve.
Right. Something I was just thinking as well is that the people that are looking at these appointments even more closely than the Americans are the Israelis. And that shows you kind of the problem with that we have, this relationship, like that another country cares this much about the appointments, because they know they all want to see what that $100 million Adelson gave is buying them.
Right.
Yeah, right. And if you think about it, of course, to the average person, $100 million is an unbelievable amount of money, but it's not a lot in the grand scale of things at all.
Right.
Like, you spend $100 million and you get a $1 trillion a year war machine behind you that you can help
that's
direct.
true. I mean, the payouts are huge. People like the Adelson family. They have billions and billions. 100 million doesn't mean anything, but they can change the course of history. It's really quite, you think about it.
It's peanuts for these people, and it's amazing that actually that our system can be bought so cheaply with such devastating consequences, because you buy this machine that has the control of the printing press, and that they print trillions of dollars, billions of dollars. We see tens of billions going to Ukraine in military aid, just getting to use and direct the military apparatus itself is an unbelievable.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it. It's true that it seems like the vast majority of Congress has been bought and paid for, by Zionist money and by other money. So you would think, well, you can't, and I think a lot of them probably have the attitude, oh, you just can't fight it. You just got to go with the flow. Can't beat them, join them. But that's not true, really. Because let's think about it. Thomas Massie was reelected unopposed, even though he was targeted by the neocons. Remember, he's the congressman that went out and said openly to Tucker Carlson, look, everybody has a minder, a babysitter. Every last member of the Republican side of the Congress and most of the Democrat side actually is, has his someone assigned to him by AIPAC who tells him how to vote, and he votes that way. And it was just like he was probably the only Republican congressman that said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not doing this for you. And so he was targeted, but he was reelected easily. And then think about Ron Paul. He was somebody who never compromised on these issues, never bowed down to AIPAC or to the foreign policy blob in any way. And he was reelected again and again and again in a conservative rural Texas district. And it shows that you really don't have to. A lot of these people, maybe in the end, they just like the money. They like being, rubbing shoulders with powerful people and whatever. I think that's probably a lot of it. But you don't need to. If you're principled, actually, because I think this is something that you find that in a lot of these rural districts, like support for foreign wars is really just an inch deep. Maybe you ask people and say, oh yeah, but it's not something that they really care, really matters to them. And if one of their local guys who they know, he's a good guy, Thomas Massie, yeah, he's one of the boys, he's the stand-up guy, I'm voting for him. They'll vote for him, as they did for Ron Paul again and again. But anyway, that's just a tangent, something I was thinking about. It doesn't have to be this way. The money's there. It's if you had principled people, it wouldn't make any difference. But you have people that just obviously don't have any principles and are quite simply greedy.
Yeah, no. It seems like it's so little money in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I know 100 million, like said, seems like a point.
Right,
I mean,
but
you
spread
bought
across
the U.S. government with it.
Exactly. But when you just divide it up among all these different Congress critters, and it really doesn't amount to much. I agree, but it makes a difference. Well, of course, that 100 million went that 100 million went directly to Trump, and it certainly did help his campaign. But I'm sure he could have won without it.
Right, but I'm just wondering, is that just really that's what it takes? Like, if there was a very non-interventionist, more libertarian-minded person that donated $200 million, would all of a sudden we get people like Ron Paul and Thomas Massie filling the cabinet?
It would help.
Is that? So I mean, you can hate the game, but it seems like that's the game that we have right now.
Right. Well, that's the thing is you have to say, you have to admit that the Zionists know how to play the game. It's just that of these top donors on both sides, more than half of them are Jewish and Jewish Zionists at that. If you look at the top 10 for the Republicans and the top 10 for the Democrats, I think it's like 6 out of 10 on both sides, more or less, are actually Zionist Jews. So they, and they get their money's worth. It's just like there should be, you would hope that there were other factions out there that were trying to do the same thing. It's like, but they're really, they're by far the leading donors in the country, and that does make a difference.
Right. So I mean, if there was like a peace lobby that just got organized and the contributions, come in and this is all, we will donate to a campaign for a peace candidate and to ensure that we get somebody that won't continue these wars, and we will help fund your campaign. Like, is that all it would take? Like, could that happen? Why can't that organically appear? It seems like that would be something that, I mean, I would contribute to it. I don't want these wars. Nobody, most people don't want these wars.
Right. Of course there are organizations like that, but they're very poorly funded. They have very, very little influence in Congress.
Why are they so poorly funded? Is it just there's no money in peace, so people just want war? Is that how it works?
If for some reason, certainly, I think when you're talking about the average citizen, most people are in favor of it, sure. But it seems to be true, like within the billionaire class, there is a very, partly because a lot of them are Jewish, but that's not the only reason. Look at Elon Musk. He's not Jewish, and he's also very much a Zionist. Zionism seems to be the reigning ideology of the billionaire class. And
why is that?
I don't know. Well, again, part of it is because of the preponderance of Jews that have been very successful in business. I mean, that's just a fact of life in this country and other countries. But that's only part of it.
But are we starting to see a shift in terms of Jews that are not Zionists anymore? I mean, that's growing. Maybe that's the only...
Right. The problem is that we're talking about
the elites.
Yeah, but the problem is we're talking about college students, people in their 20s. That's where you're seeing, younger Jews are breaking away and rejecting Zionism. I don't know exactly. I think it's not quite a majority, but it's a substantial minority of younger Jews are doing that. But they're not in the billionaire class yet. They're not congressmen and they're not, running media companies or anything like that. But maybe 20 years from now, some of them will be, and you will see a difference then. But it takes,
Are there any billionaires, elites, big CEOs that are openly against the state of Israel? Or is that just not possible? If you make it to the top, you just have to be pro-Israel.
I can't think of anybody. I really can't. Maybe there is someone, but I cannot think of anyone.
So that seems to be the problem. It's
That's
just
a big
that
part
the elite,
of the problem.
the ruling
No question
class,
about it. Yeah.
Right? They are just all Zionists, and they're all captured. And but that's just hard to believe that you think that there would be some, very wealthy, powerful Jewish people that aren't Zionists, because
it doesn't seem to be the case.
Doing.
Yeah. When you get to, for some reason, when you get up into the ultra wealthy Jews, they're just all Zionists. And of course that's not true. Among professional Jews, I say the great majority are, but there's a substantial, dissident minority. And then when you get to younger people, that minority is actually that much larger and that much more substantial. But when you older, ultra wealthy, they're just all Zionists. It's an interesting question why that is, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I just feel like what Israel is doing has really been damaging Jews around the world. That because now criticism of Israel gets labeled as anti-Semitic, and so now we have this rise in anti-Semitism because people are openly criticizing what Israel's doing, and then they immediately conflate that it must be because you hate Jews. It doesn't have anything to do with, well, we're not okay with what Israel is doing to its neighbors and the genocide in Gaza. No, it's somehow that you just hate Jewish people. And so I just feel like if you're a Jew that doesn't live in Israel, doesn't really have a connection to Israel, don't support it, you just be like, I hate these guys. They're giving me a bad name.
Yeah, well, there's
people say
right. Well, there's no question about that. They're Jews, especially young Jews, an increasing number of them are reacting in just that way. And I think probably the best example is Max Blumenthal. He's just about the harshest critic of Israeli Jews and Zionist Jews that you can hear. Yeah, he makes it absolutely clear, I want to have nothing to do with these people. And we have to bring them down. They're just. Yeah, we just need more people. But okay,
but okay, but the elite is just in lockstep. So it sounds like so basically, what you're telling me is that I don't think we can kind of hope for any type of reining in of Israel anytime in the near future. The only thing that's going to stop Israel, it's going to be Iran. It's going to be the axis of resistance. And then the question is just how far is the U.S. willing to go to
I don't think things are like things really haven't changed. It's just the previous or the Biden administration has been fully on board with everything that Israel has done. They've just done some hand wringing. It's just made a show of concern, but they keep on delivering the bombs. And it'll just continue when Trump takes over. I don't think that it's. I mean, how can the policy be more pro-Israel than it is now? There's just it's not going to change.
If you look at the Zion,
I know, but I think that's
space, they said,
I can't see how
they make it sound like right. They just make it sound like Biden is this huge anti-Semite that is destroying Israel.
Okay. That's just exactly the mirror image of what I was talking about, like the Europeans that are going crazy about Trump's election. Oh, it's all over, and for NATO and whatever. Yeah, it's the same thing. That was always nonsense. I remember seeing it. Biden has been it's the most pro-Israel president that we've ever had. He's given him absolutely everything. So that was a bunch of nonsense. I mean, Trump himself said all these things too about Biden and Harris. That they're basically Hamas supporters or whatever. But it's just beyond absurd. But it's just it gets the other side. The Zionists, a certain number of them get real excited about it, and they think that there's actually something to it, that somehow, there's some sort of substantive difference there when there really isn't.
Right. Didn't Trump call Biden? He's like a Palestinian, not a very good one. It's like, what does that even? What, I don't even know what he's meaning. The whole thing is wild. So I was going to bring this up, but it sounds like I already know your answer, but I'm going to say it anyway. So Blinken was in Brussels yesterday, and he gave a statement to journalists and said, Israel said that it needed to dismantle the military organization of Hamas and to get the leadership that was responsible for October 7th. It's done both of those things, so this should be a time to end the war. Yeah. So he says that.
Yeah, I think he actually means it. I think actually, like the Biden administration would be happy if Netanyahu just ended the war in Gaza. He's made similar statements in the past. When Sinwar was killed, he made a statement. This now is time to declare victory and go home. And I think that's actually, as far as it goes, that's very good advice. It would have been good for Netanyahu and good for Israel if they had done that. The thing is that he's just not going to ever back it up. It's just like, Netanyahu will ignore him, as he always does, when he receives that kind of advice. And there will be no consequences. The U.S. will continue to support him 100%. And Blinken will too.
I just don't understand. Yeah, I just don't understand it. Like, you get all these ultra-Zionists in there. Do they just all believe that they can just ethnically cleanse the Palestinians? I mean, Adelson, I think, was saying that she wants this 100 million. She wants to annex the West Bank. Yeah.
That's a real possibility.
A recipe for,
right. It could happen.
I mean, that's a recipe for, just all-out conflict, and just definitely a prolonged conflict. And it's going to just continue to bring down Israel. It seems like these people don't even want. Are they aware of the risk that this presents to Israel, or they don't even care? Are they just we'll just go all in?
No, they clearly have a sense of invincibility. I mean, that's been built up over the decades. And for a long time, Israel really did appear to be invincible. it had no real rivals in the region. When it fought a war, it generally won the war very quickly. There was a 6-day war in 1967. But, the big exception actually was the Yom Kippur War, which was in 1973, I believe. And they were in danger of losing that war. It was against conventional armies, Egypt, Jordan, Syria. And it was only because of an air bridge established by the U.S., just pumping in all kinds of supplies, that they were able to hold off the threat. But after that war, they acknowledged, okay, yeah, we're not quite as strong as we thought we were. And they actually did cede some of the land that they had seized during the 6-day war back to Egypt. But what followed that was that, okay, eventually, really the U.S. and Israel kind of took control of Egypt and of Jordan. So we see these very subservient governments. They've bought them off, so that both of these countries have become just dependent on the U.S. and therefore Israel. So they no longer are a threat. And so again, for the last 30 years or so, they just haven't had any rivals in the region, and they just had the sense of invincibility. Now, I think it's just, again, like we've said, that reality often gets ahead of people's consciousness. They still think they're invincible. Clearly, they're not. First of all, Hezbollah is really doing a number on them in South Lebanon. I mean, it's just, they're being humiliated by Hezbollah as far as I can tell. And then they've been humiliated by Iran, too. They've managed to cover it up, through censorship and manipulation of the media. But that era of invincibility has come to an end. It's just that most Israelis and American Zionists don't understand that. So they just think that there's just no downside. We'll just take it. It's just the way we've just showed too much restraint in the past. It's time to simply take this land. They can't really see any consequences for that. But I think there could be very serious consequences.
You think that we might be looking at an all-out conflict with Iran, where the U.S. is fully involved with Trump as president? Because the administration to me seems to be very hawkish towards Iran and hawkish towards China.
Yeah.
I just,
right. Well, I think the chance of U.S. I mean, it was always there, because it was clear that that's what Netanyahu's trying to do, and the U.S. just, under Biden, was incapable of saying no. I think they were protesting all the time, like secretly to them. But probably under Trump, they won't even protest. So it'll be all the more easy for Israel to draw the U.S. into a conflict with Iran.
Okay, that's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I just don't even know how it'll even happen. I just was seeing the other day that the Houthis fired some rockets at our aircraft carriers or some ships, and we had to turn around and get out. So, like, I don't even understand how we expect to do this.
Right. I mean, we're getting beat by the Houthis in the Red Sea. I mean, I think that's great. That's why, yay for the Houthis. But and then if like some of these European politicians get their way, I think it was just recently, it's probably the future chancellor of Germany, Metz, is the head of the Christian Democratic Party. He was saying very forcefully that we need to give those Taurus missiles to Ukraine and let them use them, strike deep into Russia. It's such an idiot. The thing is, like, if he does that, I think it's clear. I think there's a very high chance, let me put it this way, that the Russians will give ship-killing missiles to the Houthis. And then we'll start to see, ships, aircraft carriers and other U.S. naval ships go down in the Red Sea.
Wow. I was already feeling kind of down this morning, and you've really kind of brought me down even more. Just depleted what little, I'm always kind of half glass full type of guy. And I was thinking, okay, maybe Trump said he wants the Gaza war done before he enters office. He wants to end the Ukraine war. Maybe we can have some real change in policy. And basically everything you told me is just, nope, we're staying course. there's that iceberg that's in front of us, and we're just
Yeah,
full
we're
steam
heading
ahead.
towards the
We're just going to
iceberg.
ram right
Yeah.
into it.
Right, with Trump, there's always just an off chance, but I think it's a very small chance that he could change course because he is an unpredictable character. His thinking just is on these issues is just not reliable. But because he has these people in he's appointed them. Um, yeah, he'll probably sometimes complain to them like, let's not start this other war. But then they'll explain to him why they have to, and then he's like, oh, okay, whatever. I don't think there's going to be any change. Unfortunately, we're heading towards the iceberg, and we're going to hit it.
Okay, well, I mean, we're still over 2 months away from January 20th, so the Biden administration is still in charge. They're still captaining the ship that's headed toward the iceberg. Do you think that they're going to try to do anything different in this last 2 months or so with regards to these conflicts, like with their stance on Palestine? Do you think they just want to just forget about it? They're like, we're leaving, so we'll just let it kind of carry on.
I don't think we're going to see any change. They might become a little bit more reckless in Ukraine. It seemed like they were trying to get Ukraine just out of the news. I think that was sort of their policy. They realized it was just a losing issue for them. So let's not talk about Ukraine. Let's keep Ukraine out of the news. Or if Ukraine's in the news, let's just talk about North Koreans or whatever. And so there's a chance that, for example, I don't think they will, but that they might actually lift the restrictions on the missiles. That could lead to a real flare up. But they maybe at this point they don't care. They'll just let Trump deal with the mess. But so far, again, it seems like that they've held firm. The Pentagon's really serious about this. They really don't want this to happen. Maybe because they understand that their ships could be threatened. I mean, if Germany uses Taurus missiles and a Taurus missile strikes Moscow might say, okay, we'll just send a missile to Berlin. I mean, quite seriously, I think Moscow's really serious about these long range missiles. So probably, you hope there are enough sane people, especially in the various defense departments, that will prevent this from happening. But if it does, we could look at a real flare up.
It's crazy that this is even being debated. Like you said, let's just shoot them. Let's just shoot a missile into Moscow. See what happens. Like that's crazy. That's insane. And that's the World War II plan, World War III plan. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right.
Like that. That's
what he wants. Again, his victory plan was, as Viktor Orban termed it, basically a World War III plan. I mean, I think he understands. He doesn't seem to have a very firm grip on reality, but I think he understands that his only real chance for victory is to draw in NATO and make this a direct NATO-Russia conflict. I think actually Russia would win that too, but he thinks that
without a doubt. I mean, with China behind it as well, there's no way.
Right.
It's
right.
It's
that's true. I mean, if it looked like Russia might actually lose a war to NATO, I think China would intervene, not by sending troops, but just by just pouring weapons into the country.
Oh yeah. Flip that
because they're not going
to
right. At this point they see that Russia can win it on its own, and Russia doesn't need any weapons from anywhere else, from North Korea or Iran or China. They clearly can win this war on their own. But if they were actually appeared to be losing a war, let's say against all of NATO, I don't think they would. But even if they did, I think China wouldn't hesitate to just start delivering thousands upon thousands and hundreds of missiles and hundreds of thousands of drones and whatever, and it would be all over very quickly. Because China cannot afford to let Russia lose a war to NATO. They would know that, okay, we're next.
How can we have these conversations, and to me it seems so clear how suicidal these decisions that they're contemplating are, and just how stupid these wars are, and nobody in power is able to have that same conversation.
It is amazing, and but it's just true. The quality of Western leadership is just abysmal. I mean, just the intellectual and moral level is just. Well, it's just abysmally low. I mean, it's hard to believe how bad it has become, but it really is.
Do politicians have souls?
It seems to me like in the West that they don't. I mean, we call them empty suits, and that just seems like, yeah, people that just don't seem to have any kind of conscience whatsoever. Who don't really care about what's true and what's right. They clearly don't. I mean, that's why you get these people chasing a few extra bucks, um, be, and therefore allowing a genocide to continue. I mean, that's the kind of people that we have running our country and running all the Western countries. I mean,
right? It's unbelievable. It's so crazy. I mean, okay, you can be morally defunct if you're supporting the genocide in Gaza, but also you're intellectually defunct, or inability to see the reality. I mean, just first of all, okay, maybe you fall in the propaganda with that. Okay, Israel's kicking ass and they're doing good, but I mean, I think people. They should know. They see the amount of people leaving that thinks it's not good for Israel. But even then, just take a look at what's happening in Ukraine and Europe. If you're a European politician, you're living there. What's going on in your mind? This is clearly not. You're clearly losing this war. That Ukraine is losing. There's no question Europe about that now in anybody's mind.
Europe is losing too. Europe is losing the economic war.
Right. The sanctions didn't work. Your economies are in tatters. People are upset. And are they still lying to themselves? Do they still believe that somehow, yes, Ukraine is going to win? Ukraine is still going to join NATO. They still talk about this plan. Don't worry, Ukraine. Just 5 years, and then you'll be part of NATO. It's hard to believe it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many of them believe it, and maybe just a lot of them know it's not true, but they don't know what else to say. Just like we said earlier, there's just no plan B. They never thought one up, so they just have to keep on repeating plan A, right?
Yeah, but it's just like if you're for your own political survival, we see the people that do say that, hey, maybe we should engage in diplomacy. Let's try to bring an end to the bloodshed.
Right.
They do well. You look at Viktor Orban.
Well, you hear people. No, that's true. Again, it's sort of like I was talking about people like Thomas Massie and Ron Paul. Right, when they actually have somebody who comes out and speaks truthfully, they do very well. Well, again, these dissident parties, have done very, very well, but they've just been suppressed. The National Rally should have won the election in France, but because of all these machinations, they were kept out of government. And a big part of what made them popular was end the war in Ukraine, stop the support for the Ukrainian army. Yeah, and well, you do see. I think they do feel the pressure. Olaf Scholz started changing his tune. At least talking differently. Starting a couple months ago, when I think he saw how unpopular support for Ukraine was within Germany. So he's been saying, oh, he wants to talk to Putin. He has remained firm on the Taurus missiles. And I think there's some other things. Let's see, also immigration, that's a domestic issue that's very unpopular, for, he's made changes in policy. I think, he's trying to make adjustments, but he wasn't going to do anything substantial. And I think everybody knew that. So he's out of there. Unfortunately, we're going to get this guy Metz, who is just a carbon copy of him. If anything worse, that's what happens.
Okay, well, that's depressing.
Yeah.
I mean, you told me, and we've heard this before as well, is that the goal that Lloyd Austin even said this himself, the goal of this conflict against Russia was to weaken Russia.
Yeah.
That's our goal.
Right.
Clearly, that goal has backfired. Right. Russia has become stronger than ever. We have NATO has become weaker than ever.
Right.
So, are they still stating that as their goal? What's the goal?
Well, actually, they kind of modified it. One thing they'll say is just want to give, we got to send more arms to Ukraine so that they can have a stronger negotiating position. But you stop and think about it. They've been saying that for over a year, right? And over that year, Ukraine has been steadily losing, and their negotiating position is obviously becoming weaker. So, obviously that's not working. You just say that, look, if you're thinking about a stronger negotiating position, you better stop right now. They should have stopped right there in the fall of 2022. That's when their negotiating position was strongest. And some people made the argument, I think including it may have been Mark Milley, who was, I guess he was the Secretary of Defense back then. He suggested, and then he got attacked for saying that, and then he walked it back. But his advice was correct. That was as good as it got for the Ukrainians. Roughly September 2022, and since then things have only gotten worse, and they're getting worse faster and faster.
Yeah. Do you think that Zelensky and Kiev can hold on to January 20th? Is that the goal of the Biden administration, just to not have a collapse on their watch, and then give it to Trump
probably.
and let it collapse and say it's all your fault, Trump?
Yeah, they probably they're trying to patch things together and maybe prevent a collapse on the front line, and maybe a coup or something, which is always a possibility. Yeah, well, but
see,
you will see, right?
Yeah. So, but the situation right now on the Ukrainian front, are we experiencing a collapse? We've been using that word, time and time again, but it always seems to be kind of collapsing, cracks in the wall. I mean, what's happening right now?
Yeah, the Southwest is the southern Donbass. I think to use the term collapse is not in any way an exaggeration. Somebody who I found to be a very reliable guide to the conflict is Mark Sloboda, who is based in Moscow. And he's been very careful. A lot of us, myself included, have maybe used the word collapse too freely, too soon. But he's very, very careful not to use that word. But he said, like in the last month or so, or 2 months in southern Donbass, that is an appropriate description of what's happening there. The Ukrainian lines are collapsing. So, whereas it used to be that the Russians would move forward maybe 100 meters in a day, maybe half a kilometer, then the fights, a village might be fought over for a whole month or 2 months, just a village. Now, they take half a dozen villages in a day. They advance 10 kilometers in a day. Cities that might have held out for half a year fall in 2 weeks. The lines really, they're just barely able to slow the Russians down. And often, the only thing that's really kind of constraining the Russian advance is their own logistical lines, because you can't, if you advance too fast, you can get ahead of your logistics and then get in trouble. And also, if you advance too fast, maybe, again, this 21st century warfare is highly complex. It's a whole kind of ecosystem. Military ecosystem has to advance together. It's not just you got armor and infantry, but you got armor and infantry and air defense and electronic warfare, and they all have to advance together. And so that even if you don't even have an enemy, it's kind of a big cumbersome machine that can only move so fast. And so it's almost like, the Ukrainians aren't even really hardly doing anything to slow down the Russians in southern Donbass right now. They're on the verge of taking over another important town called Kurakov, which is right on the southern bank of a reservoir. And I think that's going to fall in a couple of days. And then the last city in the area is Pokrovsk. That's the one they advanced to very quickly. And they came up to it 2 months ago. And then everybody thought that they would kind of lay siege. But they stopped there, and then they focused on the south. And they took Ugledar and now Kurakov and Selidova, these other towns are very, very important. By the way, Kurakov was the last town within artillery range of Donetsk city. So that will be put, I think it already has, because they already are in Kurakov, the Ukrainians have stopped firing artillery. It went way down after Avdiivka. There was a noticeable diminution in the number of artillery shells fired at Donetsk city, and that's continued since then. And Kurakov is the last. So that's something really to celebrate. That's good news. I mean, the poor, Donetsk city has been suffering this ordeal of 10 years, a constant bombardment. It's just pure terrorism. There are no military targets there in Donetsk city. It's, they're just hitting stores and schools and hotels and that kind of thing. Fortunately, that is going to come to an end. Now they're still within range of, let's say, HIMARS missiles or whatever, but these are much more infrequent. So no more artillery on Donetsk city.
Okay. Well, when we use that term that it is collapsing in the south, and it does sound like the beginning of the end game, but you can't really say how long. They said
it's hard to predict.
Slow,
at some point it could go really. Again, what I've heard is like after Pokrovsk. Okay, there are three major battles now taking place. Or the Korotkov is coming to an end. Then we have Pokrovsk, Chasiv Yar. This is something that's gone on for like 6 months. But it looks like the Russians are on the verge of taking Chasiv Yar. It might be another month or even 2 months or something. But that's a very, very important, fortress city of the Ukrainians. And then Toretsk. They've taken most of Toretsk, and actually it looked like they were about to take it a couple of weeks ago. And then that's the one part of the front where that kind of seized up. And it's either that the Russians have decided not to push there, or that the Ukrainians threw in a lot of reserves there. But that's the one place where the line isn't moving. They are advancing in Chasiv Yar. They're advancing rapidly, in the southern Donbass. And they're also advancing, steadily, actually, I think rather quickly within Kursk. They're, the amount of territory that the Ukrainians hold there, I think they're down to like a third of what they took a couple months ago, and they're just being squeezed every day. They're that pocket that the Ukrainians are holding on to gets smaller and smaller. And then there's important battles taking around Kupiansk, which is a city in eastern Kharkov region. You don't hear much about it, but those are important. Nothing much happened there for a year. They moved up there. I think it was in 2023. It was actually during the Ukrainian summer offensive of 2023. While that was going on, the Russians advanced rather quickly and took a lot of land. We went right up to Kupiansk, and they were thinking, how is Kupiansk going to fall? But then they just stopped there. Nothing happened. But starting a couple months ago, they began to move, and they've actually had scored a series of victories there too.
Once they take Kursk back, we'll push the last bit of the Ukrainians out. Do you think that will just open up a new front, and they'll just pour in through Kursk?
Well, that's certainly a possibility. The Kursk adventure has been just a total disaster for the Ukrainians. They have, it's beyond stupid. I think it's Zelensky himself, because he's just a PR guy and doesn't understand military strategy at all. He has been sending, or Syrskyi is the top commander, has been sending the Ukrainians' very best brigades, their best equipped, their most experienced fighters, their best equipment to Kursk, and it's just being destroyed. It's been a total rout. Because the thing is, like in the Donbass, and these cities that I was just mentioning down there, these are highly fortified. In many cases, the Ukrainians spent 10 years fortifying these cities. You can just imagine. There are trenches down. They're crisscrossed with trenches, and there are hundreds of bunkers, and the high rises are turned into fortresses, and these are fortress cities. But in Kursk, there's none of that. First of all, there's hardly any population whatsoever. There are no trenches. They never had any chance to build any kind of fortifications, because they invaded it. And so they're out in the open, and it's just a big turkey shoot, and that's what's been going on. I think the Russians could have taken it back probably 2 months ago, no problem. But again, as Clausewitz said, when your enemy's making a mistake, don't stop him. I would feel a tendency, I'm sure, because it was a humiliation for Putin when it happened. And that's led to a lot of celebration in the West. But as other people point out, you don't win wars by humiliating your opponent. You win wars by destroying your opponent's army. And so Putin looked at this, and there's probably a temptation. It's like, get him out of here quickly. This looks terrible or whatever. And they could have done it. There's no question. If they devoted enough resources, they could have pushed them out in a couple of weeks. But instead, they just said, okay, we have them here. This is the best of the Ukrainian armed forces, and they're out in the open and unprotected. Let's this is perfect. Let's just stay here and just hit them all day long. And that's what they've been doing.
Right. And it sounds like Zelensky has been devoting more and more troops. He doesn't want to give it up. Like he said, he's sending his best.
He's still pouring them into there. Even though it's just obvious that they're losing and losing badly. He just keeps on pouring in the best of what he has left.
Okay, well, I don't know. I feel like it's not going to last to January 20th. We'll see what happens. Yeah. I mean, the next big one, I mean, it's just waiting for this Iranian retaliation. Do you think that with the Trump administration forming, and does this have any impact on Iran's calculation on retaliating? Because
Probably
there are
not.
this more.
Yeah, I think you don't
think so.
The Iranians are sophisticated, and I think they know. They've been dealing with the Americans for decades, and unlike Zelensky, it seemed like a lot of people in the Zelensky government or like the rest of the Europeans were hysterical and sure that Trump was going to, turn off the tap. Now, I think there's a chance, Trump, he gets involved in personal feuds. And I think that's for him, it's more important than policy. What I hear is he does not like Zelensky. Zelensky was involved to some extent in the impeachment process that was brought against him, at the end of his first term. And then Zelensky, when he came, visited during the summer, he let's say, kind of interfered in the election on the side of the Democrats to some extent, or at least that's how it was perceived by the Republicans. So Trump, I think there's a good chance that Trump, has it in for Zelensky. And so we may seem like moves to get rid of Zelensky, but I don't think the overall policy will change in Ukraine.
Yeah, my fear is that there is going to be an escalation in the Middle East now with Trump. It's hard to imagine it getting worse than what the Biden administration has done. But there's always these rumors about Iranians behind it, Trump assassinations.
Okay, right.
That story's always been...
Yeah.
Right. So just to kind of build that, justify, look, they're trying to take me out. I got to take out Iran.
Yeah. No, I think
that's what I'm afraid of.
Right. I think it's obviously, a series of false flag incidents that have been created by our intelligence agencies, probably with the support of Mossad, because it's also been happening in Israel. If you remember, I think there was maybe 3 months ago, there was some story about an assassination attempt against Netanyahu, and the perpetrator was an Iranian or some Israeli who had lived in Iran for many years. And that was totally bogus. And then you remember when Hezbollah actually sent the drone against Netanyahu's residence, the Israelis immediately pinned it on Iran without evidence. And then at the same, during Donald Trump's campaign, there were, I think on 2 occasions, the FBI stated that there was some sort of assassination, attempts or plots against Iranian plots directed against Trump. And then we just had this most recent one, where charges were actually filed. And the whole thing is absurd, just utterly false, ridiculous. But it's clear, that we've had so many incidents that there is some sort of plot, kind of something similar to, the Russia hoax. There's clearly is this is where a conspiracy theory is obviously true, and the false flags are obviously true. I think there's just no question about it. There are people in the U.S. government and almost certainly in the Israeli government plotting to create this, perception that the Iranians are after Trump.
Right. And I think a lot of people believe it. And there's that, the Trump base, I think, will be bought into that. So I think there will be more
unfortunately.
support.
So, it buys popular support for any action against Iran. And it could also, I think the calculation is it could anger Trump personally if he falls for it. And apparently he has. And it would make it more likely that he'll, act in a reckless way against Iran.
So do you think that there's a pretty good chance that the U.S. could be involved in a direct confrontation with Iran.
Yeah, well, that chance already exists. It already existed under Biden.
But clearly
that's what Netanyahu is trying to do. And I think this, Netanyahu may be behind this, meaning that he pushed it, but obviously, his allies within the U.S. government, of which there are many, said, yeah, okay, we'll work on this for you, and they've come through with these absurd false flag events.
Right, I've heard that Trump has had already at least 3 phone calls with Netanyahu. So it just doesn't. The picture for the Middle East, it was so bad already, but to me it seems like it's gotten worse.
Right,
unfortunately.
Well, in the end, though, I don't think it can get worse, and I think the fact is, like, okay, we have maybe an administration that is going to be even more reckless, even more likely to become involved in a war against Iran. But the fact is that the U.S. just does not have the means to really prosecute a war against Iran. That's just something we've talked about. It's the same thing, in Ukraine. Like apparently one of Trump's plans was to make the offer to Putin, and if he doesn't refuse, or if he refuses, to flood Ukraine with weapons. Well, we don't have any weapons to give him, so it doesn't work. It's the same thing. Okay, yeah, we can go to war against Iran, but Iran will probably sink our ships and destroy our bases. I think, again, the Pentagon is probably going to try to tell them, hey, don't do this. This is going to be bad. Yeah, we can damage Iran, but they can really damage us. So let's just not do this. So that may, maybe he'll hear the voice of reason. And if they do it, it'll actually be a victory for Iran.
Yeah, right. It'll be a humiliating defeat for the United States. Right. I think this would be I'm confident that in a conflict between Iran and the United States, Iran wins, because we don't have the capability to really wage a war over there, especially not a war of attrition. Iran's not a small place, and they clearly are quite sophisticated and have advanced capabilities. It's one thing losing for the United States American psyche, though. It's one thing to lose a war against Russia, even if it's a proxy war, or against China. But the idea of losing to Iran, I think for most Americans, they still have this
they think it's
racist idea of
No, I think you're right. They kind of imagine that it's just a slightly larger version of Afghanistan or something. And actually, the two countries couldn't be more different. Afghanistan is a very, very backwards country. And, I'm not talking about morally or anything, but just technologically, it's very, very backwards. But Iran is not. Iran is a very sophisticated country with some very impressive military technology.
Okay, so World War III, more likely now than it was 2 weeks ago?
I don't think I think it's just as likely. Again, maybe a regional war in the Middle East is slightly more likely, but I don't think there's, it's not impossible, but I think a regional war could remain a regional war. There's no reason why it has to become World War III. The Ukraine war has a greater potential for escalating into World War III. Even though I think the overall situation in the Middle East is actually much more dangerous than it is in Ukraine. If things go completely south in Ukraine, and they could, then we actually could have World War III on our hands.
Okay, well, let's hope that doesn't happen. Damn it, Dad, I feel like you're right, and I hate that you're right, being so cynical.
Yeah, the cynics are almost always right. That's what I've learned. I've got to learn it the hard way. It's easy to engage in wishful thinking. I guess I did fun. Like the first time around in 2016. There were a lot of great things that Trump said. He was going to abolish NATO and whatever. And then at the end of his term, I was completely soured on him. And I never saw anything afterwards to convince me that he had become a different person. Yeah, he continues to occasionally say great things and make great tweets, and we all love it. But just don't forget that like 5 minutes later, he says the opposite thing. That's just Trump.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, storm clouds still up ahead. Okay. Well, we'll have a lot to talk about, I'm sure, the next couple of years. So we'll keep on going. You know, I'm learning so much about this, just how the world works, and it's fascinating. And I hope people listening feel the same way. Just keep on realizing just how this machine, this political machine, just how it keeps moving forward, it keeps going, and I don't know, it's got to end. It's going to end.
Yeah, no, eventually we'll hit the iceberg. I think that's right.
Right, and there's a lot of icebergs already there on the
horizon.
Yeah,
I mean, in a way, we're already hitting them. It's not like
right.
This is something way off in the future. We've seen it happen already. The U.S. has really taken suffered some very severe damage to its reputation, and Europe has suffered really severe damage to its economy, to its military capabilities.
Right. I'm an American. I love this country, but I feel like America needs to suffer a humiliating defeat to rein it in. And that's not because I want us to lose or I want Americans to die. It's the opposite. I want us to end the empire, come back home, take care of our country, our people, learn how to be friends and get along with everybody. This hegemonic thinking is so poisonous and so destructive.
Right.
And there's no, the theory is just wrong.
Yeah.
This theory, Mearsheimer's theory of offensive realism doesn't make sense. Look at Russia, look at China, look at India. These are all three superpowers, and they're all right next to each other, and they know how to get along, and they know how to.
I think you're probably mischaracterizing Mearsheimer's theory. It's not that there are always going to be wars between, different powers. I think that's a big mistake. That's not his argument. No, Mearsheimer is a realist, and the realists, if you're a realist, you can avoid war. I think that's what he would argue, and he's been right. As a realist, for example, he understands that Russia has these security interests. And so even before the war broke out, he was saying the U.S. needs to negotiate to avoid war. I think he would say the same thing about China and India and whatever, because the realists are, understand that actually diplomacy is the cost-effective way of pursuing your own interests. War is something only of last resort and is ultimately destructive to everybody involved. And, that's a realistic appraisal. It's the ideologues that get us into war and who just don't, they don't have a grasp on reality. They don't really weigh the risks, the costs and the benefits well, but the realists do. And they can keep us out of war.
I guess what I'm rejecting from Mearsheimer is just this idea of containment. That's just not necessary.
I think, we talked about that. I think he was mistaken about that as far as China goes. Again, he's not for war with China. And he believes that China can be contained, while avoiding war. I just don't see, I think that he may be wrong. You can't try to contain China and avoid war at the same time. And there's no reason to contain China. China is a great power, and it will exert influence in that part of the world. And there's just no reason why we should try to stop it. But we talked about that at length earlier.
Right.
But that's the only one issue, where I disagree on Mearsheimer. I think he's very solidly grounded, and he's somebody that, everybody should listen to. He has a lot of wise things to say about, conflicts throughout the world.
Okay. I agree. I know. I'm a fan too. Sorry, Mearsheimer. I didn't mean to call you out. No. But I just don't like the way this is going. I just feel like the U.S., our involvement in the Middle East, we have too many bases there. They're sitting ducks. This escalation with Iran, and Israel is going to drag us in.
No, it's
and
a bad
when
situation.
Our bases get
very dangerous.
Right. When our bases get hit. Are we going to try to enact a draft and send people over there? I mean, I don't understand the plan. Or will we just try to start up our war engine and the engine just sputters and dies, and that's our humiliating defeat? That's what I'm hoping for. That we just try and they're like, ooh, sorry, we can't do this. Nobody really wants to suit up and go.
Yeah, for example, I don't see any chance that we're going to send troops to Iran. I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell of that happening. The thing I'm worried about is that if Israel really starts to lose, let's say if there's a revolution in Egypt Egypt is an enormous country, and they actually joined the Axis of Resistance and attack Israel, to bring an end to the genocide. And then Israel is actually, the Israeli army is being pushed back to the sea. That's the point where, first of all, Israel is likely to use a nuclear weapon. And then second, we actually might see U.S. troops sent there because of that, this fanatical support for Israel. That's the one exception to the boots on the ground prohibition.
Right. I mean, boots are already on the ground right now.
That systems. Within Israel, that's true. But yeah, right. I mean, actual combat troops that could, I could see that happening sometime down the road if it comes to that, if Israel's very existence is threatened.
Yeah, I just feel like we all know where this is headed, and we're just kind of waiting, just for how to play out. But the end result is going to be the same. It's going to be, there's going to be a large war. U.S. involvement is going to increase. Israel will eventually defeat it. The U.S. will suffer humiliating defeat as well. We'll have to withdraw the bases. The only thing that's kind of is uncertain is, will a nuclear weapon be used?
Yeah.
How many millions of people are going to die for this?
Right.
It's
right. I think the best outcome that I can imagine is that Israel is defeated, but does not use a nuclear weapon, and let's say most of the Jewish population of Israel just leaves. They go to the U.S., they go to Europe, and except for maybe 1 million or so, I don't know, who genuinely are attached to their land and have no animosity towards the Palestinians, and they'll be part of a new Palestinian state. I mean, that would be the ideal ending.
But I wouldn't put that. No animosity. I don't think that's...
I'm just saying there's the 1 million or so that stay. They'll make it clear we're staying because we were never part of this. And I think that's true. There's probably about 1 million Israelis, or maybe 500,000, I don't know, that generally never had any hatred, did not support the genocide, and love their land and want to stay there. And I think they would be treated with respect. They would be understood that these are not the ones that were killing us, and could be part of a new Palestinian
I think 1 million
future.
is generous.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think probably is.
Okay, Dad. Well, let's end it there.
Okay.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too.